Welcome, welcome, lovelies and gems, to another episode of the Nightcap News and Commentary. I'm your host, as always, Liz Ciccio, um, aka Liz Bounds. And let's see here. Um, oh, yeah. It's we're 10 Saturdays into the year, so it's Saturday, March 5th, 2022. Hi, everybody. So the news this week has been super exciting. I'm guessing most of us following uh, Ukraine and what's going on there. Um, but tonight I wanted to talk a little bit more about the history of how we got here. Okay. So I watched an interview, um, and I think the interviewer was a guy from the BBC, although there wasn't anything on the screen in the interview that I watched that said where the interview was from or who the guy interviewing was. But it was an interview of Putin. And in that interview, Schlante, welcome, Peter. Thank you for being here. Um, in the interview, the Putin said, well, what about what the United States did in Iraq and Afghanistan? And the interviewer says, does that justify what you're doing now in Ukraine? And Putin says, yes, it does. We live in a world of deep fakes, and we live in a world where people can splice images together in any manner they want to make any narrative they want. So I don't even know, because of the way I saw the interview, which was on a social media platform. Thank you so much. I didn't have time today to have my coffee all made up, but I do have the loveliest roommates and friends, so thank you for the coffee. Where was I? So in this world of media deep fakes, when I see an interview, when I read what somebody says is a casualty report, when I see what they say, such and such was shooting down a helicopter, and particularly when I read these stories where the whole letter was originally written in a language I don't speak at all, and I just have to take everybody's word for it that the translation is correct, I don't want to I don't completely trust any of that. Some of that is propaganda. If somebody wrote a bunch of text messages in Russian and then told me those text messages says something specific, I really don't have a good way of knowing whether that's true or not. I just have to take the translation's word for it, and I can't do that in this day and age. And that is, in fact, the entire reason for this episode's title, Heavy is the Head That Wears the Crown. After World War II, the United States was sort of bestowed a great trust on the world stage. We were given kind of a hero's wreath and told, go forth and create a new and better world. And I don't know that we were so much told go forth, although we seem to have taken it that way. But we were granted an amazing amount of trust. The promise of the United States came with it an amazing need for trust. And the United States has absolutely squandered that trust. I have a few friends who are very much anti-vax and anti-vax mandate. Nothing that I say or do is going to ever convince them that the medical industry isn't running corrupt experiments on the population pretty much 24/7. And the thing is, that fear isn't unfounded. Not even a little bit. When I was a kid, I was in group homes for several years, and while I was in those group homes, I was on a lot of psychiatric medication. Medication that I found out later had only ever been tested and approved really for adult men. The same rigorous testing wasn't done on the bodies of teenage girls. And some of that medication did physical damage to my body. Some of it was not good for me at all. Some of it messed with my head. Some of it messed physically with my body. And then I was in college when I found out that most medications that had been approved when I was in the group homes hadn't been tested on children, hadn't been tested on women. A lot of the studies when these drugs were approved were done on healthy adult men. And for, of course, more of a kicker, healthy adult white men, of course. And so using that demographic as the default, then drugs can be prescribed to, I would be deeply surprised if this oversight in the scientific process has not already been addressed since I found out about it, which was quite a while ago. Like, that would truly surprise me. But using white men as the default for drug testing and then prescribing drugs to, teenagers, sometimes children, women, the elderly, which a lot of these drugs were not tested on the elderly either. And they don't, of course, mention any of that when they're busy advertising for the latest diabetic medication, for the latest thing for restless leg syndrome, whatever it happens to be. They do read you a frightening list of side effects that make you go, oh, gee, I think I'll just live with my congenital heart condition because that sounds better today. So that's a thing. It's not just the medical industry. The news media has been caught out many times telling versions of the truth, partial truth, every now and again just running with something that's totally bogus, right? Now, some of this happens because sometimes there are agencies or entities that have a vested interest in fooling the news media into running with a story. For whatever reason, that is a tactic today. But sometimes it's just laziness, and sometimes it's downright deceptive. And they've been caught out enough times that the American people don't know what to trust. As I said at the beginning of this, I don't want to report much on the news in Ukraine because I don't know how much of what I'm seeing is straight up American propaganda, which I'm sure a great deal of it is. I don't know how much of it is absolutely factual, which I'm sure a great deal of it is. I can't sort out the fact from the fiction at this point because that's how propaganda works. And when we take what we think we know and then we start running speculations, we run a risk of accelerating the issues that we're already facing. For example, Lindsey Graham, if you haven't heard, Lindsey Graham basically got up and suggested that Russian oligarchs assassinate Vladimir Putin. That is an incredibly consequential thing to say, not because it will lead to any legitimate action on the part of Russian oligarchs, but because Putin is already feeling paranoid and frustrated. He's very frustrated. This war was supposed to be almost done by now, and he hasn't taken nearly as much ground. Last I heard, he had taken the city of Mariupol, but I also read a report that said, no, not really. He's taken some roads to some cities. He does have some ground. He took that nuclear power plant that he shelled this week. So he has gained some ground, but not even close to having full control of nearly as many areas as he needed to. And last I checked, that convoy is still stuck there like sitting ducks, I guess, waiting for the Ukrainian Air Force to come and make mincemeat of them. I'm not really sure what's going on there. And that's as much as I can say with anything even resembling certainty. Now, we can speculate with a little less danger as to Putin's motives. It's just that doing so doesn't really get us anything, okay? I happen to believe that he's putting the USSR back together one piece at a time. He tried invading Georgia. He did invade Ukraine. He did invade Crimea. And it seems clear that he's taking tactically necessary territory to help him recreate his version of the great old Russian Empire. Okay. But he's paranoid and he's angry at the sanctions. He called those tantamount to an act of war. And he's backed into a corner. And so when Lindsey Graham says inflammatory things like that, he's endangering many, many lives, because Putin's already very much at the edge. That was a useless thing to say. A guy in Lindsey Graham's position should know by now that he has an international platform. His words have weight and they matter. Instead, he's clout chasing for clickbait ratings. He's trying to sound with the heavy rhetoric and seem really anti-Russian. All he did was endanger a lot of lives. Let's hope nothing comes of it. But rhetoric like that is part of Putin's justification. He believes that it is him against the West. The West, NATO, UN, and he's trying to hold his mighty empire and make it, in his mind, whole and complete again against the West. He's willing to do that at, I think, whatever cost he thinks is necessary. And now that he is in a longer, more entrenched process than he intended to be, he is very likely to ramp up the violence. And in the meantime, the UN decided not to declare the no-fly zone, in case you guys missed that. And I agree with that decision. All it will do is escalate, and the last thing we need to do is escalate. But the United States doesn't get to sit here on some moral high ground and shake their finger at Russia either. Not after it spent 20 years, just left months ago, 20 years of legitimate invasive warfare on other people's sovereign territory using excuses that were completely way flimsier than the cockamamie retelling of history that Putin has come up with. Honestly, Putin has legitimate history that, in a telling, supports his position. That's not the only telling, but in a telling supports his position. We didn't even have that. We had the war on terror. Wars that go after concepts are doomed to failure. Putin's engaged in good old-fashioned empire building. That is a much more concrete goal. The sanctions are hurting him. That's why he's angry about them. Are they working as well as they should? No. Biden leaving out the energy sector is like locking Putin in a jail cell and then showing him the secret passage out the back door. But Putin has justified a lot of what he's done precisely because the United States broke its trust with the world. Vietnam, Korea, Libya, Kuwait, Afghanistan, Iraq. We broke our faith with the world in South America. We broke our faith with the world in Africa. We have not been the shining heroes of progress and democracy that we pretend we are when we stand up for the national anthem at football games. We haven't been that for our own citizens. We have left millions of people to languish in poverty. Our criminal justice system is a dystopian nightmare. We're out of time, we're out of money, and we're out of resources. And in spite of that, we are doing what I absolutely believe is the right thing and sending billions of dollars of aid to Ukraine right now. Is that the kind of thing that the United States should be doing on the world stage? I believe it is. But it should be a lot more of that and a whole lot less of what we've been doing for the last 40 years, which is goose-stepping our way across this globe. And we also cannot afford to do that when we refuse to invest in our own public, to invest in innovation and creativity. So now we're sending, again, billions of dollars overseas, money that apparently we have to help Ukrainian refugees, but not the refugees we have already living domestically right here in the country they were born in. And I think Americans are right to be angry about that. There is always money for foreign aid. There's always money for war, for posturing, to pay guys like Lindsey Graham to get up there and make the world a less safe place so that he can get headlines and publicity, so that he can win his next election, because if he didn't do that, he doesn't have a plan. His grift is over. It's very sad. And nothing about the way we're telling it really puts any of the responsibility on the United States, which in every way, every single time it broke its trust, either domestically or on the world stage, every single time it broke trust with the people, laid the pavement for this war and this massacre. And if it accelerates, as many people believe it almost inevitably will, I don't want to believe that. And I'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. But if it escalates, the history books should and probably will tell how the United States destabilized the globe in the previous 40 years while letting its own people get crushed under deeper and deeper levels of debt and financial insecurity. And Joe Biden, I have a very, very 50-50 opinion of his dealing with this. I agree with the sanctions, and I agree with not putting boots on the ground. But I don't see Biden as a strong leader. And on the domestic front, he's still trying to go business as usual. On the foreign affairs front, he's giving Putin a back door by not sanctioning the energy market, also the oil market, which is the only thing Russia exports. That's it. The old joke goes that Russia exports oil, vodka, and crime. We're not taking responsibility for it. We don't want to tell the history that way. We don't want to tell the history objectively. We still want to be bully G.I. Joe on the field. I think that Biden is absolutely right in not doing anything more than sending aid. And honestly, I wish we weren't spending billions of dollars to send aid to Ukraine right now. I wish we were sending those billions of dollars to fix the nation that we have, that we say we love but refuse to take care of as though we love her. Your backyard is where we start. To love your nation as deeply as the Ukrainians clearly love their nation, you have to start by taking care of what's in your own backyard. You don't get to claim all the rights of being a citizen if you're not willing to engage in all the responsibility of being a citizen. The United States does not have a right to dictate global policy without also taking the responsibility of managing global policy effectively. The dispensers of justice must be just. When they are not, chaos ensues. Anarchy, sickness, despair, war. So I'm going to take this opportunity to read some comments, because I think that's the bulk of what I had to say tonight. Really, I am just so very disappointed that the United States is in a position to let Putin get away with his whataboutism, because we cannot pretend that we didn't lay every single cobblestone in front of him, gave him every reason to do this, or every excuse, rather, to do this. So let's start in with the comments. Hello, the 42. John Harbick, thank you. Schlante. Let's see here. Money does, John Harbick, thank you for this comment. Money does tend to keep corrupt practices hushed, and an unknowing populace is one way to get it says Brian range results. I lost that a little bit. Oh, broad range results. There we go. Yeah. Yep. Money can keep us misdirected for a hot minute. It's one of the easiest ways to, the old saying, you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time. That is true. Money is one way that we can easily move people's direction so that we're fooling some of them some of the time. Let's see. Richard McQuaid, thank you for joining us. Are we talking about Putin's tactics here? I don't generally I don't generally give the adversary ideas, but Richard McQuaid, if I was in his shoes, I might set a trap with a large convoy of defunct vehicles in disguise, use a faint convoy as bait, invite an attack so he isn't cast as the aggressor, or possibly a misdirection to give us something to focus on where something else goes on elsewhere. Yep. I mean, those are definitely all tactics used in conflict. I don't think that's what's happening with the convoy outside of Kyiv. I think that one is just out of fuel and stuck in the mud. So that's a thing that's happening. The Kurdish people. Oh, we should do an entire show on the Kurdish people. If that's a story you don't know, that's a story you should know. First of all, I believe that the Kurdish people are entitled to sovereign territory. I believe that they also should have rights there. The area that is historically Kurdish is now split up between 4 or 5 other nations, and they are generally not treated well in any of them. They were our allies until we decided to abandon them. That's another place the United States absolutely broke trust. We broke trust with the Kurdish people. That's a thing that will not be forgotten. Not by the people who live there. So, yeah, we if we don't start taking responsibility for what we've done that led up to this, we're not going to be able to meaningfully look for solutions to end the conflict. I don't know if you guys know this, but just a couple of days before the invasion actually started, Ukraine had signaled their intention to back off seeking membership into the UN. They were going to drop it. They believed Putin. They took him seriously. They were going to drop it. Putin invaded anyway. He had that intelligence. He knew the United States and the UN, NATO, and the Ukraine all said, okay, let's pause. Let's not do this right now. They did it to de-escalate. Putin invaded anyway. Why? Why, when his bullying demands got the response he claimed he wanted, which was for Ukraine to not join NATO? Well, because that was only part of his motivation. That was really okay. And it wasn't even part of his motivation. It was the legitimate, the valid excuse that he used. His intention has always been to make Ukraine a region of Russia again. And he is not going to stop until he is stopped. And I think people need to be very clear about that. I don't really know if I want to say much more on the subject of Ukraine at all. For precisely the reason that I believe too much speculation at this stage of the conflict by anybody that isn't sitting in a war room looking at actual logistics and who has plans. And I don't believe anybody else speculating does anything except create fear, and fear creates the opportunity for disaster. So I would like to suggest to people that they ruminate a little bit less about whether the button is going off tomorrow, because our fear can create the conditions that cause the thing we fear. We do it all the time. We're actually pretty spectacular at this particular thing as a species. As Bo says, thank you for this comment by Peter Kinch. As Bo says, we should be the world's EMT or cahoots, not the world's cop. He's referring, Peter is there referring to one of the best YouTube channels on the internet today. If you want a rational breakdown of what you should be looking at, what's going on, why it's happening, and that is the channel Bo of the Fifth Column. If you have not subscribed to that channel, if you don't watch that channel, you absolutely should. He is so well reasoned. He is not given to hyperbole, panic, or overt displays of emotion. He just breaks things down very clearly, compassionately, solid use of logic. I really love his show. And he's absolutely right. The United States, I have often believed, should be the breadbasket of the world. What we have as a natural resource beyond most other continents, beyond most other nations of the world, is a massive amount of land that is good for farming, grazing, ranching. We have some of the best land in the world, and we could become extremely wealthy just by taking care of our forests, growing our mushrooms, our vegetables, growing beautiful flowers, growing hemp, bamboo, and other products that the world needs, moving to a more plant-based economy would make the United States an immense amount of money. But instead, we peddle in peacekeeping. I hate that we use words the opposite of what they mean, don't you? I mean, peacekeeping is everything but. I've never ever heard the word peacekeepers applied to a group of people that actually served the purpose of keeping the peace. Like, if that has ever happened, I would be genuinely surprised. It's like the Citizens United ruling had nothing to do with citizens. There was no united. Yeah, that was. Or right to work, which actually means right to be fired at any time for any reason, including the ones that on paper are federally illegal. I've been fired for being a woman. That was super fun. Tried to go to a lawyer, get told, oh, you live in a right to work state. I've got the guy on camera, like on camera, saying to another coworker that he fired me because I was a woman. And the lawyer's like, okay, thanks. Yeah. Words and phrases that we use all the time as euphemisms, like free market capitalism. There's no such thing as free market capitalism. As long as government subsidies exist in any market, anywhere in the market, there's no free market capitalism. That's not a thing. So I don't know. I don't know what we do from here. We're stuck in this weird place where we're looking down the barrel of World War III. And Monday we will get up. We'll brush our hair. We'll put on our good jeans. Scratch the frost off the windshield of the car. We'll go to work. And we'll come home and we'll read the news. And we'll wonder how much of it is lies. But I don't want people to feel helpless or hopeless or alone in this. Because you're not, and we're not. You have neighbors and friends. They're watching the same news as you are. They have ideas for their neighborhood, for their city, for their county. And what makes the United States, what made the United States and could make it again a real powerhouse on the world stage is that our law not only allows for, but encourages us in some ways to get together with those neighbors, to form committees and action groups, to make a difference in all the little ways that can be made, that we can make difference. I volunteer for the DNC. There are plenty of people who can criticize me for going corporate. And trust me, I get it. I criticize me for going corporate. But the DNC in my area is who has the infrastructure to allow me to have a voice in the direction of my neighborhood, my city, my county. I'd like to make new infrastructures First, I got to learn what I'm doing. They have a semi-okay one, so maybe I'll learn something. Um, and maybe I'll get together with my neighbors, and maybe we'll have a barbecue. And not just a barbecue where we hang out and, you know, throw kunai at the hay bales, which is always fun. Don't get me wrong. But maybe one where we sit down and we have a meeting and we talk about our neighborhood. And we talk about building each other up, making crafts fairs, making block parties, making play dates for our children, getting to know our neighbors. Governing yourself begins at home, and then it begins in the neighborhood, and then your city, and then your county. We are in charge of this train. And if it feels like there's nobody at the wheel, it is because too many of us are not at the wheel. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. We can't spend all of our time complaining about everything working against us if we're not willing to carry wood and fetch water and do some of the heavy lifting ourselves. So tonight, I'd like to end by encouraging everybody, not necessarily to go volunteer at your local DNC. That was my particular choice, or even at your local RNC if you happen to be a Republican. But to think about a way to connect with your friends and your neighbors, to start the process of self-governance by governing with the people around you, by making your community stronger and making your voices heard. When we do that, and then we begin to elevate those people, the ones who rise to the top and become great leaders among us, when we elevate them then into state legislative positions, governorships, mayors, into other positions, they are people that did the work with us, and then we can trust who they are and what they say. But that is on all of us. And if you feel disconnected from government, it's a little bit on you too. You have to put in the legwork. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. Our freedom is not free. A lot of people like to immediately use bloodshed to point out that freedom is not free. And I think that's rather extremist of us, actually. Oh, how very American. How very, very American. Our freedom is not free because it takes work. It takes volunteer hours. It takes canvassing and phone calling. It takes talking to people. It means making policy decisions on every level. And then making sure that your voices are heard and represented well and accurately in the halls of government. And we can't do that watching the evening news and decrying the state of world affairs. We can't do that just by noticing that the train is running away without some of us jumping up to volunteer to try to guide it to a safe stop. Okay, so it's more comments time. Thank you, John Harbick. Pinky, get started on the cupcakes. It's time to take over the world. That would be, if we showed up as the Cupcake Brigade, I think we'd get a lot less resistance just in general. Show up with art supplies and grandma's apple pie. People will be like, come right on in. Narf. Okay. Oh my goodness. You have this great comment by Fred Eater. Thank you so much for this. You have to make a difference where you can with the resources available. The DNC is a good beginning. Well, thank you. Thank you. And Peter Kinch. Well, Humanity Forward, I think it says Malualade? Malualade? That sounds like it should be the words in a song somewhere. That's pretty. I don't know what you said there, but Humanity Forward. Humanity Forward, yes. I guess I should do some reading up on. I don't want to spend all of March. It's going to be so hard to avoid war news. And then on the other hand, I don't want to talk about war news because I'm not even remotely qualified to talk about war news. Really? I am not. But I think maybe talking about human-centered capitalism and community building might be a great way for us to feel a little more stable in who we are in our communities, and then hopefully bring that further and further out until we become strong as a people again in a way that doesn't have as much to do with these deep, rigid partisan divides that we find ourselves currently in. So, mutual aid. Oh, okay. Mutual aid, Humanity Forward. Okay. Got it. Okay. Thank you for clearing that up, Fred. And thank you, Peter, for your comments. Thank you also, John, for your comments tonight. And also to Richard McQuaid, everybody who was here this evening. I really appreciate your time and patience. I am going to cut out a little bit early tonight. I just don't want to sound like I'm going round and round in circles or offering some great lecture. And I'm sure you guys are more or less keeping up on what's going on, as it is nearly possible to miss right now. But if you have any suggestions, again, for some episodes we might want to cover, I really want to cover human-centered capitalism soon. I want to get more into a topic we covered not nearly as well or as much as I would have liked to back in February, which was looking at the issues that we have with some really outside the box, more creative solutions and bridging that gap between what we know what we know in academia, what we know when we are in college and in university, and what's happening in the real world, and how to make, at least start to try to knit some kind of bridge together there. So, okay. Thank you guys very much for being here. As always, I appreciate your time. And, of course, see. Mr. Spock also says, live long and prosper.